Welcome back. This is Business Insights. My Twitter handle is @O'Brien Kimani. I told you we have Ken Gichinga in studio with us. Thank you so much, Ken, for passing by.
Thank you for inviting me.
Do you have a Twitter handle, by the way?
I do, @K-Gichinga.
@K-Gichinga is his Twitter handle, in case you want to engage with him further. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Tell me, please, first of all, what are your views on the Big Four agenda?
Well, O'Brien, I always like to start off by reminding you of the potential this country has. On paper, this country has the potential to be the brightest port in Africa. Why? We have a young, educated population, we have a diversified population, and we have a growing infrastructure. And we are almost the gateway to the region. So on paper, we have the potential to be. But because of the policy mix that's pursued both by the fiscal side and the monetary side, I feel Kenya is unable to reach its fullest potential. And when I talk about the monetary side, I talk about what banks are able to lend and unable to lend, and that's hurting SMEs. And on the fiscal side, where the government is spending, I don't find a lot of money going to the real economy. So until we get the policy mix right, I don't think we're going to hit that 10% double digits that we saw in the manifestos.
And the Big Four agenda, it talks about doubling manufacturing contribution to our GDP from around 9.5 to 20%. And of course, you have seen some of the outlined strategies. Do you think this is achievable, by the way?
It is achievable. Manufacturing, as you say, it's a key cog to the economy. But what really feeds into manufacturing, you have to have a growing agricultural base that can produce raw material in which that can be processed. For me, when I listen to the farmers, I find they're still in a struggling position. So for me, I think we have to almost look at the entire economy. We really can't remove manufacturing and say, we have to look at agriculture, then move on to manufacturing, then move on to services. So I think the Big Four, again, on paper, is one of those promising prospects. But when I think about, is that money going to the real economy? Is it supporting the base? I feel there's still some gaps in that area.
So, Amethyst, if you were McKinsey, what else would you have added to the Big Four?
I would have added innovation.
Innovation?
Yeah.
Wow, why innovation?
Because for me, Kenyans are one of the most entrepreneurial societies in the world. We're the home of M-Pesa. Think of how many M-Pesa ideas are sitting that are not getting access to funding and to mentorship. So in as much as the way we have the musical festivals in August, I wish you'd have an innovation festival where every county would be challenged to come up with 5 game-changing ideas, because that is really, the human capital is really what gets Kenya above its regional peers, because you can't compete with Tanzania on natural resources. You can't compete with Ethiopia on natural resources, but on the human capital, Kenya has been blessed with one of the best human capitals, but I don't think we are extracting as much.
We haven't capitalized on that.
We have not capitalized on that.
Very well. And you are raising a very important point here. And this is a point a friend of mine, ex-Iraqi, keeps on raising. We know music festival winners, they go to State House.
Correct.
What becomes of science festival winners?
Well, to be fair, nowadays is an innovation week, I think in the month of around Easter time, March, April. But it's a one-week event, and it doesn't get really, it has been growing in stature over the last 3, 4, 5 years. So it's getting more recognition. But, when I think of that young man who made the solar-powered vehicle in Uasin Gishu, I think that's somebody who we should have been celebrating. We should have been saying, this is somebody who's discovered a solution to win this economy off the oil dependency. But I don't see those kind of conversations. I was expecting to see the county government, that we throw up our KCSE candidates in the air. I was expecting to see him being thrown in the air and, challenging other people.
And the throw was led by the governor, by the way.
Exactly. I was expecting to see that happen so that we can have young more young people coming out and saying, you know what, I want to be the next innovator. That's what has built America. I'm sure you've read, The Great Men Who Built America, that book. And it's all about people who take initiative, innovation, with a government that supports that. So I think we need a government that stimulates innovation. And we need to learn from Israel. You've read The Startup Nation, that book, The Startup Nation. And it's really about how Israel became one of the most innovative countries. So even if it's in a desert, it's still exporting milk to Europe. It's still producing. Israelis come to Kenya and they really get surprised by how much we are punching below the belt, because we have a country with...
They don't get it. I mean...
They don't understand it, because we have a fertile country. So for me, I think we just need to get the policy right. We need to encourage enterprise. We need to discourage idle resources.
Very well. So much of that. Timothy, from where you sit, what do you make of the economy?
Brian, after the handshake, I was very optimistic. And already I saw the economy starting to tick up. And it is ticking up. But it's not at the speed that we had expected. Part of it is because banks are still not lending as they can. Credit to the private sector is growing at about 4.8%. It needs to be growing at about 5 times that rate for us to get to meaningful growth. So, yes, we are better than where we were last year, but I feel the growth is at a much slower pace, and I think it's causing a lot of anxiety, because people are expecting by August 2018 we should be firing on all cylinders.
And of course, we all remember the events of August last year. At a time like this, the economy was in turmoil. The political space, was in utter chaos. It was utter chaos in the political space. Have we recovered from this?
I think politically we have recovered. The fact that we've been able to come back as one country, and
are we?
At least on the surface, on the appearance, the fact that, and I think the handshake, and in as much as we would like to criticize these leaders, I think the fact that on that particular day they were able to rise above their differences and come together and recognize that corruption is one thing that can tear this country apart. And who wants to be the president of a country that's falling apart? So I think kudos to that. But for me, I think, and again, also the fight against corruption, we've seen that happening. But for me, I need to go back to, the policies. Can we have a stimulus program? Because right now we are seeing the judiciary complaining they've not been allocated what they would have wanted. Various sectors saying they're not been allocated, which tells me that there's a silent austerity program that's running. So for me, we need to say, can we have a stimulus program? Can we get money into the real economy? And when I talk about the real economy, I'm talking about where the mama mbogas are in every county. Can we fix markets? Can we fix those small roads that connect farms to markets? For me, those are the real economy segments that have to be really, really looked at. And you can argue that that's the work of the governors, and the county governments and the national government have to work in concert.
Look at the amount of money that we spent last year, on elections. At first we spent, was it 16 billion shillings? And then we ended up spending another 15 billion shillings. Right. In a span of 6 months, we spent close to 32 billion shillings just to manage our elections. Honestly, such a poor country of 45 million people. Do we really have misplaced priorities?
I would not call it misplaced priorities. I think one thing that I love about Kenyans is, in as much as they recognize that we are a middle-income country and we can become richer, they also value the democratic process. They also want a country that's built on democratic values. And for me, that September 1st ruling, actually for many people across Africa, that was a shocker that only Kenya can attempt such a thing. So for me, in as much as we say, yes, can we follow China? Can we have a dictatorial path that can lift 1 billion people out of poverty?
In a span of 25 years.
In a span of 25 years. I'd like to remind people that poverty is not just about economic poverty. There's many types of poverty. And if you read the book, Development as Freedom, Amartya Sen, he talks about these wealth, not just in the economy, but there's also in the democratic process, in economic rights, in equal opportunity. So for us, what I like about Kenya is Kenyans want it all, and we can have it all.
We can have it all.
Yeah.
Tell me things. I mean, we have seen, the cost of electricity
Right.
go up. We have also seen the cost of fuel also going up, based on the monthly reviews by ARC. And also we are waiting for the 1st of September when VAT is expected to come back, into oil products. Tell me this, what is likely to happen to the economy?
Obviously, that will slow down production because people who would have, for example, visited downtown 5 times a week now will say, oh, the cost of fuel has gone up, will come twice or thrice. So that reduces the amount of transactions, it reduces the amount of economic activity, and obviously that slows down the economic growth. So that even that 6% that we've been aspiring to might be a stretch. So for me, and when I talk about the policy mix, these are the things that I'm talking about. Granted, I would understand that some of these things are being pushed by the IMF, like the VAT on fuel. That's an IMF prescription. So sometimes the government, I understand that they have to follow with that for them to get the standby facility. So for me, it's...
And you help us understand what is that, the standby credit facility.
Right. But I was very proud when I saw the central bank governor saying we don't need those extra loans. For me, I think that was the first time a central bank governor in Kenya had stood up to the IMF. And for me, that was a turning point. That was a turning point in this country. And
tell me this, I mean, we are living in very interesting times, whereby, the central banker, is reading a different script from the physical makers in this country, and I'm talking about the National Treasury. Because when you ask the central bank governor, he says, we don't really we need to treat carefully on the reintroduction of VAT on fuel because it's likely to hurt economic growth going forward. But when you look at what Treasury is saying, they're saying, no, these are conditions that we agreed with the IMF and we must follow them, failure to which we are going to be denied access to the credit facility by IMF. I mean, if you are part of Treasury, what would you do?
I mean, the economic argument the governor of the central bank is making is very simple. He's saying, look, the IMF wants to give us $1.5 billion for it to be our standby facility in case we face shocks. We can always tap onto that standby facility. What the governor is saying, we have forex reserves that are going to almost 6 months of import cover. So we are covered. We don't need an extra standby facility because these extra standby facilities come with conditionalities. And part of these conditionalities is to increase your tax base. So you could say he's going against the grain, but he's making a fair point because the reason central banks build reserves is to protect the economy from shocks. So we don't need additional buffers that are coming.
We already have enough.
We already have enough. And for me, I think that's this guy is a Yale PhD. He knows what he's talking about.
He understands his stuff.
He understands this.
And funny enough, I mean, we've been having this standby credit facility since 2014.
Right.
We've never tapped it. What makes us believe that we are going to tap it going forward?
I don't know if somebody has ever tried to sell you a credit card, one of these commercial banks. One of the things that they always tell you is, look, O'Brien, if one day you'll have an emergency and you might need this credit card in case of that emergency. But if you look at what most people spend their credit cards use on, it's rarely for emergencies, it's for shopping. Impulse buying. So for me, I think what they call this facility, I don't think it's really useful, and that's what the governor has explicitly said, because the country has foreign exchange reserves that can cushion it through any volatility over the next 6 months. And the law says we should have reserves up to 3 months of import cover. We have almost 6 months, almost double the required by the law. So this idea that we need additional buffers, which come with extra conditionalities, I agree with him. We do not need that. We need to start depending on our domestic taxes and not on international aid. If you saw what Greece has been through, their bailout program ended this week. But if you ask what an ordinary Greek fellow has gone through over the last 6-7 years, it's a nightmare. It's not something, 1 in 5 have gone down the poverty line.
Yeah.
The economy has shrunk by 25%. So for me, we need to wean ourselves off these debts and start first supporting innovation. Then once these innovative enterprises can start paying taxes, taxing them, and start really living on our own sweat.
And then, do you think the National Treasury, has the gusto to tell IMF, look here, we welcome your credit, we don't need your credit facility for now, leave us alone to sort out our mess?
I'd say half and half, because in 2016, they managed to suspend that VAT tax. This VAT tax was supposed to come in September 2016. So they were able to surmount the courage to push back another 2 years. What Kenyans are saying is, can we suspend this for another 2 years, because most businesses are still recovering from last year. Let's give businesses 2 years to recover. Let's stimulate them. Let's put money in their pockets. Then in about 2 years' time, they can put in that VAT as they wish. That's the ask.
Gichinga, I want you to paint for us, a picture of post 1st of September. The VAT has come in, raising fuel prices by around 15 shillings. What will life look like?
Life will look like when you drive into your petrol station and you're told fuel has gone up from 113 shillings to 130 shillings. So if you're used to filling your tank with maybe 1,000 shillings, then think again.
If you drive a bit,
Exactly. But for the bigger part, because fuel doesn't just affect people who are driving, it affects food production, it affects manufacturing, it affects the cost of doing business. So anybody...
And even transport.
And even transport, exactly. And the Matatu Welfare Association, they say they're not carrying any of the costs, they're going to pass it to the ordinary monanchis. It means people who would have wanted to participate in the economy will have to maybe sort of half their economic activities just to accommodate, because that the 1,000 shilling note you have might be going much less than what it used to.
And of course, we have also seen, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, saying that, look here, this 16% introduction, VAT introduction, is going to be bad for business. And we can tell you for sure, as private sector, we are not going to shoulder this burden. We are going to push it to the consumers. So the question is, what happens to a consumer who has been pushed to the ring?
Well, if he's a middle-class consumer, he has something called cheaper substitutes. Let's say, for example, you are used to going out for dinner once a week. Now you'll stay at home and eat at home. But think about the...
So what becomes of the hotel?
The hotel has to now find... you go to some of these Nairobi hotels, you'll find they become empty and emptier by the day. But the person I think about the most is the person at the bottom of the pyramid, because he can't have cheaper substitutes. He's already living the cheapest life possible. So for those kind of people, you have to be very careful, because the temptation now to get into crime now becomes real, because now you push people to the edge and they start looking for illegitimate means to make money, and for them it becomes a security question.
And something else, what will this introduction of VAT do? What will happen to our environment? Let me feed you statistically. 69% of energy used in Kenya is biomass. And we know for sure that our forests, have borne the brunt of our destruction. And when you make kerosene and gas more expensive, a lot of people will have to go back to firewood and charcoal. And this is going to deplete our forest cover, which stands at less than 7%. Are we also looking at that? Do you think the government is looking at that?
Well, that's a very powerful point, which many policymakers, that's a blind spot that I think many policymakers would not have anticipated. But you're absolutely right. When people look for cheaper options, they'd go to the forests and they're gonna, as you say, deplete the forest reserves. I think, and we've talked about this again, is we need to have a rethinking of the next 4 or 5 years. And part of that has to be encouraging enterprise. And by encouraging enterprise is helping people really appreciate that Kenya is here for the long haul. Let's look for sustainable ways to grow our businesses. And I think even if you saw it in what we saw in Kitui, the whole scuffle, you know, people are realizing we need to conserve this land. And you saw how Kenyans got angry when the rhinos passed on. So it's not to say Kenyans don't care about the environment. They do care about that. But for me, I think a lot of people, as you say, what happens is when you push people to the edge, then they start thinking, okay, what's the priority? Is it me feeding my family, or that tree growing? So we need to make sure we don't push Kenyans to the edge. And how do you prevent that? It's by stimulating, encouraging the enterprises.
Very well. Gichinga, you know, we have to come to the end of this interview, but I want to hear from you. Looking forward, based on all the issues that we have discussed here, number one, I want to believe that, you know, Kenyan policymakers, you know, they have looked at all these things, and they have their position, which probably maybe they're going to let us know in the course of time. I want us to make a bet. I am of the opinion that Treasury will shelve those plans. What is your bet?
I think September 2016, they had more courage because a general election was coming up, and that's the last thing you want to do to an electorate. But I think with the elections behind us, I think now people are now looking, for them, it's more how to reduce the deficit, and that's by increasing taxes. So I think I think they might continue. I've not seen any sign to suggest that they might relent on it. I feel they are under pressure from the IMF to do it. So even if they wanted in their own volition, I think there's strong pressure from the Bretton Woods institutions to comply with these. So I feel they'll relent, but I feel if they have to, they have to think of other ways to compensate people. They have to think of maybe subsidies, maybe in the farming, in agriculture, do subsidize farmers. So at least a tax here can be offset by a subsidy in one of the products. It could be in agriculture, it could be in manufacturing, but they need to do a rebalancing so that net, the ordinary mwananchi doesn't feel that he's being overexposed to the harsh economic realities.
And of course, you know, we have seen, you know, some sentiments from President Uhuru Kenyatta's, you know, top economic advisor saying that that is something that they are studying, and they will give a way forward soon. My bet is that, you know, the government has studied, you know, all the implications of this, and they are likely to put a brake on this. If they don't, I'm going to supply you with a full week, with a half bag of avocados. Okay. What will you?
Well, you know, there's avocado demand is skyrocketing. But for me, if they say it, fine, Kenyans, we have to put this VAT on the fuel, but we will encourage banks to start lending. You see, that could make at least the process even.
So sort of a rebalance.
Some rebalancing, because money, at the end of the day, all Kenyans want is money to start flowing. Either it's flowing through the public coffers or it's flowing through the banks. When some restaurant owner is paid, he doesn't care where the money came from. That's what we need. So if they can say, we'll command the banks to lend more to SMEs as we increase the VAT, maybe you might have that kind of more sort of like a better acceptance towards that VAT.
Ken, go ye out there and talk to policymakers and convince them. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for passing by.
Always a pleasure.
A pleasure listening to your insight.
Thank you for having me.